One more foot. That's all it would take to push the Great Salt Lake past two different thresholds at once. One that state engineers built on purpose, and one that nobody wanted to see broken again. On July 8th this year, a wall of dust rolled off the lake's exposed bed and swallowed the Salt Lake Valley whole. Air monitors downtown spiked to nearly 4 times the healthy limit for breathable particles. Locals described the sky going the color of weak coffee in the middle of the afternoon. Not haze, not smog, an actual visible front of dust moving across a metro area of more than 1 million people. Thick enough that people who'd lived there for decades said it felt like a different state entirely. That's not a preview of some future disaster. That happened 5 weeks before this video was written. So what does one more foot of water actually change if the lake's already doing this? Right now, the Great Salt Lake sits at 4,190.4 feet above sea level. 2 numbers matter more than any others on this river system's calendar this year. The first is 4,190 feet, the exact elevation where state managers have said they'll have to close an emergency berm to protect what's left of the lake's healthier half. The second is 4,188.5 feet, the all-time record low, set in November of 2022. Drop one more foot from where the lake sits today, and it doesn't just approach either number, it's below both of them at once. 14 years. That's how long it's been since this lake last touched what scientists consider a genuinely healthy level. 4,198 feet. Last seen in 2012. Everything since then, every year of the lake is stabilizing, or the lake is recovering, has still been years below what a healthy Great Salt Lake actually looks like. You've probably never thought about the fact that a single foot of elevation on a lake this size represents an almost unimaginable amount of water, and also somehow isn't nearly enough of a buffer anymore. Why does 1 foot even matter this much on a lake that covers over 1,000 square miles? Because this isn't really one lake. It's 2, glued together by a 20-mile railroad causeway that Union Pacific built across the middle of it in the late 1950s. Picture 2 rooms sharing a single low doorway. One room gets fresh air pumped in constantly. 3 rivers worth, in this case, the Jordan, the Bear, and the Weber, all draining into the south side. The other room has no fresh air source at all. It only gets whatever drifts through that doorway from the room next to it. 2 concrete culverts under the causeway are that doorway. They're the only thing letting water and salt trade places between the fresher south arm, where the beaches and the boat harvests and most of the ecosystem people actually rely on still function, and the north arm, already so salty it looks pink from satellite photos. Managers built an adjustable berm into that opening specifically so they could choke it down further if the south side ever got dangerously low, trading less water exchange for a shot at protecting what's left on the healthier side. 4,190 feet is where that trade-off tips. 1 more foot, and it's not a hypothetical anymore. And that door only swings one way in an emergency. Closing the berm to protect the south arm doesn't refill anything. It just decides which half of the lake gets sacrificed first. Nobody's published a plan for what happens to the North Arm's ecosystem, thin as it already is, once its only water source gets cut down further to save the side people actually depend on. This isn't a new problem the lake stumbled into overnight either. And you've heard almost this exact sentence from this channel before about a different body of water entirely. In January of 2023, a group of Utah scientists put a number on how bad it could get. Without emergency intervention, they warned, the Great Salt Lake could functionally disappear within 5 years. Did the warning actually work, or just get lucky on timing? Honestly, both. That warning worked, at least for a while. Utah lawmakers introduced 14 conservation bills in response. 9 of them passed. The state created an entirely new office of the Great Salt Lake Commissioner just to manage the recovery. And then the weather cooperated too. A heavy snowpack refilled the watershed, and by June of 2024, both arms of the lake sat a full 3 feet higher than they'd been 2 years earlier. Governor Spencer Cox took a victory lap. He called the 5-year warning a joke, dismissed it as doomerism that never accounted for how fast conditions could turn around. For a governor who'd spent 2 years fielding questions about a dying lake, 3 feet of recovery was a genuinely good story to get to tell. So which version turned out to be right, the scientists or the governor? Both of them, for a while, which is exactly the problem. The 2023 to 2024 winter genuinely bought this lake time. It did not fix the reason the lake needed saving in the first place. Winter 2025 into 2026 delivered less than half of Utah's typical snowpack by early March. The recovery that made headlines 2 years ago never became the new normal. It was one good winter, borrowed against years of average or worse ones. As of this month, the lake is sitting close enough to its all-time low again that state hydrologists are openly discussing what happens if it gets there. Nobody's calling this one a joke. Let's be fair about what's actually driving the shortfall, though, because it isn't only the sky's fault. The Jordan, Bear, and Weber rivers all get diverted for cities and farms long before they ever reach this lake. Salt Lake City's entire metro area draws from the same watershed the lake depends on to survive. Every lawn watered in the Salt Lake Valley this summer is water that decades ago would have kept flowing another 40 miles north. That's not a conspiracy, it's just where 30 years of population growth collided with a river system that was never big enough to satisfy everyone at once. And growth isn't slowing down to give the lake room to recover. Utah remains one of the fastest growing states in the country, and every new subdivision along the Wasatch Front adds one more straw into the same shrinking glass. If you've wondered whether any of this connects to why your ski trip felt shorter last winter, it does, more directly than you'd expect. The Great Salt Lake generates its own lake effect snow, cold air passing over open water, picking up moisture, dumping it back down as snow on the mountains east of the lake. Right now, that effect still contributes roughly 5% of the snowfall at Wasatch Front resorts, feeding a ski industry worth $2.5 billion a year and supporting nearly 32,000 jobs across the state. 5% sounds small until you remember it's the same 5% every storm system relies on, season after season, layered underneath every other inch that falls from the sky. Shrink the open water enough, and that lake effect contribution doesn't decline gently. It just stops being available to shrink, the same way a battery doesn't run a little bit dead. So is skiing really the biggest economic stake here, or just the most visible one? The lake supports another $2.5 billion in direct economic activity beyond skiing, and 9,000 jobs tied to the lake itself. Somewhere in that number is an industry most people outside Utah have never heard of, feeding fish farms on the other side of the planet. Every year, boats skim the Great Salt Lake's surface for something the size of a grain of pepper. Brine shrimp cysts, dormant eggs that can sit for years before hatching. Roughly 40% of the entire world's supply of brine shrimp cysts comes out of this one lake, sold as feed for farmed shrimp and prawns, propping up an aquaculture industry that now produces about half of all the seafood eaten on the planet. In a good year, the harvest is worth up to $67 million to Utah's economy alone. Brine shrimp need salinity between roughly 11 and 14% to thrive. By late 2022, as the lake sank toward its record low, salinity in parts of the South Arm pushed close to 19%. Stressed shrimp, fewer eggs hatching. A harvest season nobody wanted to talk about. Tim Hawks chairs the cooperative that represents the harvesters who make a living off those tiny eggs. Real boats, real crews, working pre-dawn shifts on open water most tourists never think to look twice at. He's not exaggerating for effect when he says the industry is still standing on thin margin. One hot, dry summer would put us down close to risk levels. He's also credited some of the industry's own commercial management with helping avoid disaster so far, calling it proof that good regulation can genuinely protect an ecosystem. That's real, and it matters. It also hasn't made the underlying math go away. Ask Hawks what a lake permanently below that risk line would mean for an industry supplying nearly half the world's farmed shrimp feed. And the honest answer is that nobody's run that experiment yet. Nobody wants to be the year it finally happens. That's the economic half of this story. The half that's already landing on dinner plates and lungs is worse. Researchers at Utah State and the University of Utah tested what's actually inside the dust blowing off this lake's exposed bed. And the list reads like a toxicology report: arsenic, uranium, lithium, beryllium, antimony, cadmium, lead. Decades of regional mining runoff, agricultural residue, and industrial discharge have settled into this lakebed the same way sediment settles into any low point in a landscape. And none of it went anywhere. It just waited under the water until the water stopped covering it. Then researchers went a step further than most dust studies bother to. They grew cabbage in soil dusted with it and brushed the dust directly onto the leaves, the way wind actually deposits it on real backyard gardens across the valley. The toxins didn't wash off. Cadmium turned out to be nearly 4 times more absorbable once it hit stomach acid than when it was simply inhaled. Lead wasn't far behind. In more than a third of the exposure scenarios researchers tested, toxic metal levels on those leaves crossed thresholds considered concerning specifically for children. Dust is an acute health hazard, says Janice Brani, the Utah State researcher who helped lead the work, but rarely measured for composition or bioavailability of potentially toxic components. Translation: most public health warnings about this dust have been guessing at how dangerous it actually is. Now there's a number attached, and the number is worse than the guess. So which crisis is actually more urgent right now? The shrimp harvest 6 months from now, or the vegetable garden somebody's tending this week 2 miles from an exposed lakebed? Both are real. Neither one is waiting for the other to get resolved first. Ben Abbott, a BYU ecology professor who's been sounding alarms about this lake for years, put the fix in the plainest terms anyone connected to this story has managed. When the lake level is low, we all need to tighten our belts and use less water. Not a metaphor about the lake, a direct request aimed at everyone living along it. That's a hard sell in a state adding new residents faster than almost anywhere else in the country. Competing for the same 3 rivers, a wetland full of brine shrimp and 12 million migratory birds, also needs to survive. More than 300 bird species pass through here every single year. One of the largest shorebird stopovers on the entire continent, and every one of them is drinking, feeding, and resting on a lake that's currently 1 foot from breaking 2 thresholds at once. The 2023 warning turned out to be wrong about the timeline. It was not wrong about the direction. 2 good winters bought this lake exactly what a good winter buys anyone living paycheck to paycheck. A temporary reprieve, not a fix, and a shorter runway the next time the snow doesn't show up. What actually changed between 2023 and now wasn't the lake's fundamental math, which was never really in dispute. It was how confident everyone got that 1 wet year could keep bailing it out indefinitely. That confidence is the part now getting tested again, in real time, by a winter that's already come in under half of normal. Nobody knows yet whether this winter will be the one that pushes the lake past 4,190 feet, or the one that buys another year of borrowed time. What's different this time is that everyone watching now knows exactly which number to watch, and exactly what happens on the other side of it. A berm closing on one arm, a record broken on the other, and a metro area of over 1 million people breathing whatever that decision kicks up next. Subscribe if you want to find out which way this one breaks first, because unlike 2023, nobody gets to say they weren't warned about the number itself.